your own.
Hello and welcome to the Least Haunted Podcast, a place where science, skepticism, humor, and anthropology meet to discuss all things spooky, haunting, supernatural, and sometimes just the plain ridiculous. I'm your host, Cody Franks, and our almost always co-host Garth is on special assignment tracking down the legendary two-toed sloth with the extra toe. And I know what you're thinking, isn't that just a three-toed sloth? But no, this is like totally different. It's a two-toed sloth with an extra toe. And in true cryptid fashion, he's not where people would expect him to be, you know, like Costa Rica or anything like that. No, they see him on the New Jersey PATH train, which is just bizarre, you know, just a sloth hanging from the railings. Anyway, that's where Garth is.
I've seen that one.
You've seen him.
I've seen him,
man. So joining me this time via a Ouija board that I kludged together with a speak and spell in an old Microsoft Zune that I found in the gutter, the host of the Hoppy Trails podcast, half of You, Me, and Squee podcast, and Least Haunted's own official attorney.
That's right. Yeah. It's Travis. Hey.
Hey, this time you didn't deny it. You just resigned yourself. You're our attorney now.
Yeah. After so many court appearances, Cody, I can no longer deny it. It's
Those aren't public record, right? Nobody knows why I was there, right?
No. And I mean, you know, all those times that you bailed me out, I feel like I owe you back. So
yeah. I feel it's more like the Hunter Thompson and
this has completely screwed my whole weekend because, of course, I'm going with you.
You're gonna need plenty of legal advice before this thing is over. Oh, yeah. As your attorney, I advise you to rent a very fast car with no top.
Okay, so you're the host of the Hoppy Trails podcast. For any of our listeners who do not know about that, can you briefly pitch the show?
Yeah, the Hoppy Trails podcast, as Nick and I described it when we were recently guests on another podcast, is it's filling a niche that was really just missing representation. Two cishet white guys talk about beer and food. You know, really, we feel like we're finally bringing that representation to the podcasting space. Yeah. So
sorely absent, you know?
It was sorely absent. We're here to represent. No, it's, really what it is Nick and I, you know, we were very good friends in high school starting freshman year. So we have been very close best friends for, you know, I don't know, decades and decades. And, we decided since I moved, you know, down to the Central Coast and Nick moved up to Oregon, we thought, this will be a good way for us to make sure we stay connected and talk regularly. So we do a podcast about beer and food and enjoying life and whatever else strikes us.
And you are somewhat of a beer expert.
I mean, right. Yeah, Cody, that's the nicest way anyone's ever called me an alcoholic before, but yeah, you can say.
I mean, you host a podcast about beer.
True.
You are president of a brewery.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, California's first and only cooperatively owned brewery. That's true. I've been a member owner for a long time now. Was there when we first started brewing, developed the first 3, maybe 4 recipes that we did, and currently the president. I've got a little experience in beer and the beer industry, if you will.
Passing the bar and stocking the bar.
That's right. Yeah. Pass the bar, but also never pass a bar, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I have you joining me today kind of because of your beer expertise. I think that's it's invaluable in discussing today's topic. And today's topic is Headless Horsepeople.
Yeah, Headless Horsepeople. I really think that my background and experience in beer and brewing and all things heady, if you will really lend credence to the topic.
Yeah. That was the most tenuous connection I could find for this topic. And I'm like, yes, we're going with that. But I need to clarify, Headless Horsepeople. That is people who are headless that ride horses.
Yes.
Not people riding headless horses.
No.
Although, as we will find out, sometimes the horse also lacks a head. And we aren't talking about centaurs who have run afoul of a bunch of French Jacobins and the guillotine.
Yeah. Viva la revolution! Is that no? That's wait a minute. That was more South American and Cuban. Sorry, my accents were wrong. But just imagine that with a French accent, and it was on point.
we'll, we'll fix it in post.
Pommes frites.
Omelette du fromage. Does that do anything for you?
Yeah.
So we're talking riders on horseback where the rider lacks a head on their shoulders. Sometimes, though, they do have a head. It's not where you would expect it to be.
Sure. I've actually known a few the horseback riding enthusiasts who have their heads up their asses. So sometimes that's where maybe you expect it to be, maybe not.
We have a term for those. We call them English riders. Oh, shots fired from the West. You can tell what kind of horse riding I did. I was a cowboy. But why horse people? Why am I not saying horsemen or horseman? It's because it's not always a man. You need to stop thinking in such limited gendered reality of the supernatural, Travis.
Yeah. Jeez, I better get woke.
But to get this head rolling, let's start with probably the most famous headless equestrian in popular culture, the Headless Horseman of Washington Irving's short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Yes.
So what do you remember of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow? Because as it turns out, somebody else I talked to recently had a very different recollection of how this story played out.
You know, here's the thing is I have not been exposed to this story in so long that what I remember is there's an Ichabod crane, something about a pumpkin, and that's about the gist of what I know.
Okay. Well, I mean, you got like two of the important things there.
There you go. Wait, two out of how many important things?
As we find a whole bunch.
Yeah. So an F. Okay.
Yeah. If I was the teacher in the class and you turned that in as your report, I'm like, well, okay.
And this is why you have to read the book and not just the Cliff Notes, okay?
Right? I read the story for this to get all ready for it, and it was different than I even thought, because I'd only known there's a Disney version that's, I think, from 1949, I want to say, and it was Mr. Toad's Wild Ride and Ichabod Crane. It was two segments. One of them gave us arguably the best ride at Disneyland.
Sure, yes.
But I don't know why they didn't go with the Headless Horseman ride, because it would have been just as wild.
Yeah, I feel like some stories I've heard about certain theme parks and amusement parks is some of those turned into headless rider rides.
Yes. Yeah. Disneyland. Yes.
Not uncommon.
Okay, so the story originally written by Washington Irving. So people might think that this is an actual like old legend, because it's called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Sure.
So it must be really old.
Sure.
And it isn't. It's from 1820. Washington Irving wrote it. And Washington Irving was like one of America's first popular writers, at least in fiction. So he kind of like begins the tradition of American fiction writing, but he also writes nonfiction stuff too. He's like a jack of all trades. He's a lawyer, politician. He's like Ben Franklin. He's a publisher.
Yeah.
He writes histories and like science treaties and stuff like that. He just does all kinds of stuff. But he's also a bit of a prankster. So he was born in Manhattan in
New York City.
He was born in 1783, the same week that news started to spread that the British were surrendering or ceasing fire in the revolution.
Oh, wow.
So he's born the week the revolution ends. And so growing up, like, can you imagine, I guess it'd be like the baby boomers growing up right after World War II, that really absorbs a whole bunch of your consciousness.
Yeah.
Because like your parents and all the older people fought in the war. In fact, one of his later friends is Aaron Burr, the guy who shot Hamilton, is a friend of his later who tells him a bunch of stories of his time fighting during the revolution. When he is 15, he gets sick and his parents send him from the city across the Hudson River into an area of New York that was, New York used to be New Amsterdam, so it's Dutch settlers. So they send him up the Hudson River Valley to a place called Tarrytown. Tarrytown has since changed its name. It is now Sleepy Hollow.
Oh.
Because he wrote the story about Tarrytown.
Yeah, foreshadowing.
A few other things he wrote before that, though. Pop quiz. What is the NBA team from New York called?
The Knicks?
Yes.
Nailed it.
But do you know why they are called the Knicks?
Ichabod Crane.
Well, Washington Irving. Yeah. So Washington Irving.
Okay. I knew there was a connection.
So the Knicks is short for the Knickerbockers.
There's that show called the Nick, which is about the Knickerbocker Hospital.
So Knickerbocker is a term that is basically used for anybody who is from New York City, or more specifically, I think it's Manhattan. And why is because at the age of 23, Washington Irving's fiance passes away suddenly. She takes ill and dies.
Yeah.
And so as a way to cope with this depression, he thinks, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a complete history of New York from the beginning of time until the end of the Dutch colonial period. But it's all going to be satire. And so he writes this satirical take on like the history of New York, and he writes it under a pseudonym where he calls himself, is it Diedrich? Oh, let me find it real quick. Yeah, Diedrich. So the book is called A History of New York from the Beginning of the World to the End of the Dutch Dynasty by Diedrich Knickerbocker. And he writes this book, and the way he goes about releasing it, though, is a bit of early guerrilla marketing. So super ahead of his time. Basically, he takes out an editorial in a paper where he is pretending to be the manager of a hotel in Manhattan. And the manager is putting a public notice to collect a debt where he says, this old cranky Dutchman, Diedrich Knickerbocker, stayed in my hotel, was a total asshole, ran up a huge bill, trashed the room, and then skipped out without paying.
Yeah.
But he left behind this manuscript, which is very salacious. If Diedrich Knickerbocker does not pay this bill, I'm releasing the manuscript. I'm going to publish the book. So people read this, and they suddenly, like, everybody's invested in this Knickerbocker scandal. Everybody wants to know, like, well, what's in the book? Like, what's the manuscript? And so he, like, keeps putting these things in the paper and builds up the hype of this Knickerbocker book, and then finally drops it. And it's just the satirical, like, history of New York where he basically, you know, calls out a lot of people through thinly veiled allegory and so forth.
I did almost the exact same thing when we had to put my dog down. So it's strange that we have the similar grieving process.
Right? He also published a periodical that was like a forerunner to The Onion. It was called Salmagundi. And it was just a satirical, it would make fun of all the news stories, and it was basically The Onion, but this is like in 1809.
Yeah.
You know, the Knickerbocker book does pretty well. He decides he's going to write a few more books in a similar satirical style, but he writes this other one, which is called The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, right. And it's a collection of essays and short stories written by a fictional character who is Jeffrey Crayon. I don't know. It's before Crayola, you know. So
well, I was actually wondering. It's like, okay, well, you know, if the name is Crayon and it's the sketchbook of Crayon, like, is that a pun there? But are crayons not invented yet?
Because I think Crayon. Hold on. It's French, yeah, and it means chalk.
Oh, okay.
So crayon is chalk. And so, yeah, you're exactly right, like a sketchbook. So I think he is doing a literary pun.
Okay.
He also adds the honorific gent to imply that this is a gentleman who is writing the story.
Absolutely.
And so it's a collection of short stories and essays. He wrote this while he was actually traveling in Europe. He goes, I think we talked about, well, Garth and I talked about in an earlier episode that there was a time when young men, both in Europe and like well-to-do men in America, it was expected that you just like go on the grand tour. You go and sow your wild oats. You tour Europe, you see all the shit, and then you come back and you should be all settled down.
Sure, yeah.
And so he goes on this trip and he starts writing this collection of stories and essays. And a lot of them are nostalgic for that time when he was 15 and he was sent to live in Tarrytown up the Hudson River.
Yeah.
So out of this book, there's two very famous stories. The first one, Rip Van Winkle.
Oh, yeah. Rip Van Winkle. Excellent story. Yeah,
right?
I would love to take a long nap. That is my idol.
Well, that one, the story is that the guy goes into the woods. He finds some weird like Dutch dudes playing 9-pin bowling.
Yeah.
They get him drunk and he bowls with them, and then he falls asleep. Yeah, and he sleeps for decades. Right.
Yeah.
Fun fact: do you know that Vanilla Ice's real name is Rob Van Winkle?
No, I did not know that.
And the fact that he didn't choose Rap Van Winkle as his rapper name tells you all you need to know about how stupid that fucker is.
Oh, that's why he failed. Oh,
Right?
man. Can you imagine? Oh, that would
Rap
have
Van
been
Winkle?
so amazing. So amazing.
And of course, the other story was the Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go all the way back to when I asked you what you thought the story was about, and now I'm going to give you a synopsis of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
And to be clear, I believe my understanding of the story is from the Disney movie.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's my only exposure.
Well, the other person I talked to about this, their only knowledge of it came from the Tim Burton movie, which is vastly different as well.
When was the Tim Burton movie?
1999. It's actually pretty damn good. I mean, it's not a faithful adaptation of Sleepy Hollow.
Sure.
It's like inspired, and then it's Burton-esque. And it's before Tim Burton had really gone off that like edge where everything he made was like a, derivative of something he made before.
Sure,
It still was like, he was still on that cusp. So it's
Yeah.
all right. So the story, though, is framed that, again, he frames it that I didn't write this story. Of course, this is Washington Irving speaking as Jeffrey Crayon,
Yeah.
claiming that Jeffrey Crayon only heard this story from somebody else.
Right.
I think he says Diedrich Knickerbocker is the one who told it to him.
Which-
so again, it's a...
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm like, where does Knickerbocker come into this whole game of telephone here?
Right?
Yeah.
It's like unnecessarily convoluted.
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
But the story is tiny little village outside of Tarrytown called Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah.
And it's a Dutch settlement, old Dutch families. Everybody's Dutch. Very, very Dutch.
Yeah.
And into this area
Little
comes
boys with their fingers in dikes. Very Dutch.
windmills.
Windmills, wooden shoes.
Tulips, the whole 9 yards. So into this comes Ichabod Crane, who is actually English, and he is from Connecticut. So he's an outsider.
Yeah.
And he comes into Sleepy Hollow, and he is going to be the school teacher.
Yeah.
And it talks about how he doesn't live in the schoolhouse. It's that everybody in the community takes turns, so he stays with them a week at a time and lives off their hospitality. So he's kind of like living off the community, making his rounds. And as he's doing this, he like he's trying to teach all the ladies how to sing. He's kind of like trying to ingratiate himself.
I'll bet he
Right?
was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it happens that he ends up in the Van Tassel house, where there is young Katrina Van Tassel, young, freshly marriageable aged woman, and the family's very wealthy. They have a huge farm. And so he thinks, I am going to marry that girl and take her dad's land as my own and become part of the community. She has another suitor. This guy, his name is Brom Bones.
Yes.
Brom is the shortened. He's like Gaston. He's totally just Gaston.
Yeah,
from,
he's
Beauty and the
Gaston.
Beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they probably used like the same character model by memory, unless I am like doing a Mandela effect and like those are combined in my head. But Brom is short for, it's the Dutch nickname for Abraham, so he's Abraham Bones.
All right. Quick question though, before
Yeah.
we get too far from this, and I forget. The whole teacher comes into a small village and then is hosted around by families. Is that historically accurate for the time period, or is that something that was just made up for this story? Like, did that happen? Teachers just they weren't paid well like now?
I think that might be the case, because the idea that we always have is like later from that, in like the later 1800s, the one-room schoolhouse where the school marm lives in the schoolhouse, right?
Yeah.
And that might be the case, but it might be that, at this time, in this context, a young bachelor man, would just make his rounds it's a small enough community that that's what they're doing. But I don't know if that's exactly accurate. I don't know why he would make that detail up.
Yeah.
The guy who makes up we're 3 pseudonyms deep at this point.
Yeah,
so.
seriously. You don't know why? I mean, no reason really. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Any reason or none at all.
So while this is happening, this little like love triangle, because Brom Bones, he's like, well, I want Katrina Van Tassel. I should, logically, I'm part of the community. I'm not an outsider.
Yeah.
You know, we're insular. That's how it should be. So next to this whole backdrop, though, he is also telling the story of the Headless Horseman, which is a local legend in the area of a Hessian soldier. Hessians were German mercenaries that the British hired during the Revolutionary War, and they were known to be particularly brutal in their actions and how they operated. So a Hessian soldier on horseback who got his head shot off by a cannonball.
Yikes.
And during a battle. And they quickly buried him outside of the old Dutch churchyard. And now the idea is that he rises from the grave to go looking for his lost head.
Yeah. As you do.
There's a fall, like a Halloween harvest feast that's happening, a party at the Van Tassels. Ichabod goes. He's going to make his move. We don't actually know this. It's like scene redacted, according to the narrator. Like, we don't know what happens. All we know is that, like, eventually it's just him and Katrina. He says something to her. Basically, he proposes to her. And then the next thing you know, he's running out upset and he leaves.
Yeah.
And he gets on his horse, which actually he had to borrow a horse because he's so poor that he doesn't have his own horse. He had to borrow a horse from the local blacksmith, and this horse is named Gunpowder, and it's impressively old, and it's like missing an eye. It's like
that sounds accurate
apart.
for teachers, right? They have to, they're not paid well enough to have a house or a car that's reliable, and
they all drive like 15-year-old Subarus that are like 3 colors.
They've got a Geo Metro that's like one of the headlights is out, and it's the whole thing.
Yeah, so he leaves in that, and as he's riding back, he starts to get spooked. He starts to kind of think about, he starts thinking about this story. They've already introduced the idea that he's also a very superstitious person, and that he gets easily excitable.
Yeah,
and so that's part of his like character, his flaw. Is that he's also really excitable and a bit of a coward that takes to flights of fancy. For example, the fantasy that he was going to marry this rich farmer's daughter.
Sure.
He just doesn't live in reality.
Stop torturing yourself, man. You'll never afford it. Live in the now.
And so as he's riding, he becomes aware that there is somebody else riding beside him or coming up behind him on the road. And they pull up alongside him, and he looks over and realizes that it is a massive figure in black with no head on a black horse.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he starts, doing what you would do, which is, I'm going to fucking run away from this. So he tries to outrun this Headless Horseman. It's chasing him. And part of the legend of the Headless Horseman is that if it crosses the bridge over a stream that is next to the old Dutch churchyard where the Headless Hessian is buried, that it like disappears. And so he's like, I just need to make it to the bridge. I just need to get to the bridge. And at one point, the horse, because it's half blind, stumbles off the road, and it's going through the brush, and then it comes out, and he gets across the bridge and looks back, and then the Headless Horseman, he thought it was holding its head. It lifts up like a jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah.
Or its head. First it says it's its head. But if you're watching the Disney one, it's very obvious that it's a pumpkin. And it throws it at him.
My memory, yeah.
Yeah, throws it at him, hits him in the head, and then the narrator says, and that's the last anybody saw of Ichabod Crane. Like, all they found the next morning was the horse Gunpowder wandered back to its stable.
Yeah.
They found Ichabod's hat and a bunch of pumpkin guts, although some thought it was his brains. And he's never seen again. And then whenever people talked about him in the community, because they were like, oh, the Headless Horseman took him, they would say Brom Bones, who's now married to Katrina, would always smile knowingly. Because, it's obvious, it's very obvious that it was him. And then the story ends up having a moral, because it then has a postscript from Diedrich Knickerbocker, who's like, well, I did some digging, and it turns out Ichabod Crane, it was a real person. He did show up somewhere else. He became a colonel, and then like a politician elsewhere in New York or something like that. And when I first heard this story told to me, it was at a gentleman's club meeting. And this is not, gentleman's club like strippers. I mean an actual, bunch of dudes who would get together and sniff their own farts and drink brandy.
As you do.
And he said he hears it at this gentleman's club meeting from a guy who's from the area of Tarrytown. And then the storyteller. So now this gets confusing because now we're 4 storytellers deep.
Yeah.
He's like, he asks another dude in the room, well, what do you think was the moral of the story? So it's like now we find out this isn't just a legend. This is supposed to be a fable. We're supposed to learn something from this. And the gist of the lesson that is then related is that this is a cautionary tale about outsiders to mind your fucking business. Lower classes, don't try to mingle with the upper class. Know your place and stay out of it, basically, is the moral of the story. So it's supposed to also be satire because, he's the same way. It's this satirical tale about here's a poor school teacher who doesn't belong. He's not Dutch. He's, English from Connecticut. He shouldn't even be there. And he's trying to take what isn't his.
Right.
That can be juxtaposed, though. We're going to go into the literary analysis of the Hessian soldier is a mercenary who's not from there, who was brought in to subjugate and put down the Dutch settlers who were still in the area during the Revolutionary War. So you have the two writers, the Hessian and Ichabod Crane, both representing this idea of someone who should not be there and doing something they shouldn't be doing. In the case of the soldier, even more so because now he's dead. He should not be there, but yet there he is, right? And so that's the whole point. Is this is like a story about xenophobia and like
xenophobia. Don't fuck around with the Dutch, right?
More people know that story than even Rip Van Winkle. Or he created Knickerbocker, or the reason Batman is in Gotham City is because Washington Irving, he gave the nickname Gotham to New York City. He's the guy who started it.
Based on, is Gotham, did he just make that up?
Gotham is an Anglo-Saxon word. If I pronounce it differently, you might get the meaning, and then I'll say what it is. Gotham? It's goat home. It's goat town. It is like goat city is basically what it is. And I think it was one of his satires. He was talking about it's a city of like obstinate, thick-headed, dumb goats, smelly goats. It's the city of goats. Yes, the city of goats, Gotham.
Yeah.
So we get that from him too. His version of Headless Horseman becomes really popular. That book is published again and again to the point where then later this guy in Texas he writes his own book called The Headless Horseman, where he basically like takes the same themes of Sleepy Hollow and then transposes it into like when the Texans were during the Mexican-American War, basically. Instead of it being a Revolutionary War soldier who got his head blown off by a cannon, it's now a dude during the Mexican-American War who he didn't get his head blown off. He was a horse thief, and they like decapitate him and then tie him to a horse and send the horse running off. And now his ghost runs around. And then in that story, there's a love triangle, but in the love triangle, one of the suitors frames the other for murder. And then at the same time that this murder happened, there's supposedly this headless horseman who's riding around. So maybe he's the one who actually committed the murder. I don't know.
Wow. Okay. All right, that's quite an adaptation.
The original Sleepy Hollow is like 1820, I think, published 1829, and then the Texan one by Mayne Reid was written and published in 1865. So like just at the end of the Civil War.
Yeah.
And we'll get to a point about how there's we're going to talk about how there's all around the world this idea of a headless horse person, a person on horseback without a head. And it is an archetype. And there's certain commonalities that a large part of them fall into. And it seems to be around war. You have this idea.
Not having a head?
Well, yes, that. But like specifically, the stories are all somehow based around, like the origin has to do with a war.
Yeah, whether the war currently or that it's this person was from the previous war, it's the ghost of them. Very interesting.
So also the story of Sleepy Hollow takes place in 1789. So it takes place just a few years after 1799. Sorry, it's for the century, 1799. But it takes place, just like a decade and a half after the end of the Revolution, which is interesting that even in that story, they're like, in less than 20 years, there's already ghost stories about the Revolutionary War that just happened.
Yeah.
So that happens pretty quick. It gets into the consciousness in that way. But there's a few other details about the story of Sleepy Hollow that can give us insight into where Washington Irving got the idea. So I mentioned that he's writing it while he's touring through Europe.
Yeah.
I think he actually wrote it at the time he's in Germany. And there's a German version of a headless horseman. There's a story about a headless soldier or somebody who lost their head violently who rides around. But in this version, they can be both bad or good. It's kind of like ambivalent as to what their motivations is, because they can kill you just by touching you. But they often they often can help people, or will go out of their way to like not kill the person. So one way they would do it is like this headless horse person rides up and they hold up a branch between you and them, and then the branch dies and then they let you go. It's like they're cursed to take people's lives or kill them, but they don't want to, or they don't have to.
Okay, so they're holding the branch, they touch it to you, and once that connection is made, the branch dies.
Instead, yeah. It's like the branch is sacrificed instead of you. It takes your place, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So he might have heard that, and he's like, okay, well, there's sort of this idea of, headless persons. Then going to, in Ireland has the Dúlacan. And the Dúlacan is similar to the Banshee. And some say it's actually like a... like the Banshee's like, stepsister or whatever. It's so the Dúlacan is a headless. It's a rider on horseback who their head is like severed. The horse also doesn't have a head, but the horse's head and the Dúlacan's head are still there, like they're being carried or floating alongside of them.
So like the rider carries their own head and the horse's head floats next to them.
In some depictions, yeah. In other ones, they say there is no horse's head, but he has his head. Yeah, so he carries his own head in either his hand or under his arm. And that severed head is said to be very grotesque and rotting.
As it would be, yeah.
Right. And so what does he do? Well, he just like rides around. Sometimes actually he's driving a horse-drawn carriage that comes out of a graveyard. The stagecoach he drives is like a coach of death. Like, you don't get in there because he's come to take you he's come to take you. You're going to die.
Yeah.
And that's the way that it kind of is similar to the Banshee announces the death of somebody, and then the Dúlacan comes to collect you. There's a lot of modern additions that were made to the story of the Dúlacan, but most of those come in like the 20th century, actually, and that's like that it wields a whip made out of a human spine, or that the coach that it drives, like the spokes for the wheels are human femurs, and it's made out of human skin, and a bunch of like grotesque stuff. But that seems to have come much later and is not part of the original story.
That's all pretty metal right there.
Right, yeah.
That's all pretty metal.
Pretty metal. And then in certain areas of England, you have very specific versions, and they all have like their own spin on it. There is a connection that sometimes gets made by folklorists to a figure called the Green Knight. Have you heard of the Green Knight?
Of the tales of King Arthur and the Round Table?
Yeah.
And
I think Tim King told us about the Green Knight in our Yule episode back in season 1. But the short version of the story is that this knight who doesn't just wear green, they are green. Like, their flesh is green. Like, as a Smurf is blue, this guy be green. And he shows up at Christmas Eve at a feast at, like, Camelot or the castle, where, depending on the story, it's not always Camelot where King Arthur is. But he shows up and he's going to challenge, he wants to see if they're worthy, and he says, we're going to play a game. Anybody here who thinks they're worthy, or that they are like righteous and pure, can strike a blow against me, any blow, knowing that I will return the same blow to them. And so King Arthur's going to do it, and then Gawain says like, no, let me do it for you. And he thinks he's going to be clever. He's like, well, if I cut this dude's head off, he's dead. He can't do that to me. That solves the problem.
Yeah.
So that's what
game over.
Yeah, right. So that's what I'm going to do. So the Green Knight lets him use his own axe. He's like, here you go, take my axe. And Gawain swings and he decapitates the knight. The knight then reaches down, picks up his head, and depending on the story, he either puts it back on and is fine, or he just like carries it. And he's like, okay, I'm going to see you in 1 year, at which point I'm going to deliver my blow to you. He's like, come find me at the Green Chapel. Then he hops on a horse and he rides away. So the main part of that story that only matches is that, like, in some versions he has no head and he's riding away on a horse, so he's a headless horseman there. But
remind me, in that story, does Gawain does go and find him at the Green Castle, and I don't remember how it ends.
He goes and finds him, and the knight basically bluffs him. He gives him 3 little taps that are very light, and the last one barely nicks him. And he says, like, no, you kind of proved yourself because you came. You didn't have to. You came and sought me out to uphold your part of the bargain. Although a detail that often gets out is another part of that story is that once Gawain gets there, he doesn't immediately do the game with him. Instead, he like lets him stay there for 3 days and then tries to tempt him to like break his vows of chastity or his good personness. And that includes sending the Green Knight's wife to seduce Gawain and try to sleep with him, and he turns her down. He's like, all right, you're good with me. I'm not going to cut your head off. You know, you didn't fuck my wife.
It's highly problematic. Well,
right?
I mean, I get if everybody's consenting, it is what it is, right?
Yeah, if she's in on it, and that's her. I mean, maybe that's the thing. I'm not going to shame them.
That's it. Not here to yuck anybody's yum, as they say.
Yes. So, but there's another thing from the greater British area that we have talked about before that is very similar to the story of Ichabod Crane. And it
Beans on toast.
No, well, it's something that actually, like, as I was reading Sleepy Hollow, I felt there was a connection between these two things, and I couldn't figure out how they were connected. And so our listeners know, this is like, how long have we been trying to record this episode, Travis? What, like
this episode? I mean, at least a couple of weeks now.
Yeah, like almost 4 weeks.
4 weeks, yeah. I'd say 4 weeks.
So we have to keep rescheduling it. Every time we've had to reschedule, I just keep doing more research on this topic. And it was like just maybe night before last where this last piece fell into place and it all made sense. Okay, so the thing that we have talked about before that is very similar to the story of the Headless Horseman chasing Ichabod Crane is the Nuckelavee from the island of Orkney. So that was an episode probably 2 years ago about, on the island of Orkney, they have this story about a creature called the Nuckelavee, which appears to be a like chimera beast of, it's a horse with a human torso coming out of its back. The human torso has a ridiculously large head, sometimes described as being pumpkin-sized head, that lolls about on its shoulders. It has no skin. The thing is completely skinless, and you can see its veins that are pumping like black blood, and it's really gross. And one of the most famous stories about it is about this guy named Tamas, and he is traveling on a road at night along the shore in Orkney when he sees what he thinks is a rider approaching him. He calls out to them. They don't answer. They get closer. He sees that it's the Nuckelavee. He turns around and runs away from it. It gives chase, and he's only saved at the last minute because he leaps across a small body of water and gets to the other side. And when it hits that point, the Nuckelavee cannot cross and either dissipates or disappears or rides away. And I was like, well, that just sounds like you got to get to the bridge, get across the bridge, and you're safe from the thing. It's a rider on horseback, sort of. It doesn't have, I mean, it's not headless, but the head that it has is pumpkin-like.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, that seems interesting. A bit more than coincidence. At first, I thought it was just the archetype of running water, being a thing that is a transitional zone between life and death. There's a lot of things that can't cross water or running water. In the original Dracula, for example, he cannot cross running water himself. He has to be carried across in some form. And that might
really?
Yeah. And it's because water, especially flowing water, is pure. You know, stagnant water is obviously deadly to drink, or it's gross. So that's something of death. But if the water is flowing, it means that you can drink it. It's safe. Things live in there. And so it becomes this symbol of life. Rivers in particular are like a transitional zone between life and death. I talked about this in the recent Stonehenge episode, how the river Avon might have been a ceremonial avenue which represented this separation of life and death. And think about it, like when you come into the world, you are covered in, the amniotic fluid. You're wet. You've come
True.
from.
I've seen it recently.
Yeah, it's so it is this idea of the water of life, and so there is in many cultural beliefs around the world. There's this like archetypical idea of the running water is a barrier between life and death. It also is purifying, and it can keep spirits from crossing.
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
that's
makes
what that's where my mind first went. Where I'm like, oh, maybe that's definitely part of it. But then the final piece fell into place. So Washington Irving. He's the child of immigrants. His mother comes from Cornwall, which has its own story of a headless rider. His father from the island of Orkney.
There you go. There it is.
So,
okay.
And I haven't seen any other researchers or articles that talk about the story and the origin of the Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow that have said, hey, there's a connection here. His father is from Orkney, a place that has a creature that is kind of like the Headless Horseman. It has a famous story that is very much like Ichabod Crane.
Yeah.
All those pieces come together. So I think what happened is he's touring around Europe. He's encountering other stories of Headless Horse people. That is jogging his memory where he's like, oh yeah, my dad used to tell me this story when I was a kid. He'd tell me and my siblings the story from his homeland of the Knuckleavee. And then he combined that with the time he spent hanging out up in upstate New York, up that, in Tarrytown in what is now Sleepy Hollow. He also, like I said, he was friends with Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr has a story about being at a battle in the Revolution in New York and seeing a dude's head get blown off by a cannon. Yeah. And he told this story to Washington Irving. So all these pieces come together and become the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. That's really amazing.
Right? I've got some more thoughts on the origin of this archetype of Headless Horse people. But first, it's time to dig for bones.
Or dig for skulls in this case.
Do you like beer?
Of course you do.
Do you like good food?
You better believe it.
Then we have the show for you.
It's the Hoppy Trails podcast.
I'm Nick.
I'm Travis. And on each episode of Hoppy Trails, we invite you to come along on our journey to explore craft beverages and the foods that accompany them.
Check out Hoppy Trails on hoppytrailspod.com or listen wherever you find your podcasts. Connect with us on Instagram at hoppytrailspod or reach out to hoppytrailspod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
Come travel the Hoppy Trails with us, and remember to always say yes to the Hoppy ending.
Cheers!
Are you a new parent trying to find your way?
Or are you thinking of becoming a new parent and want to know what to expect?
Or do you not plan on having kids, but just want to know what it's like?
Nobody without kids wants to know what it's like.
I'm Travis.
I'm Stephanie.
And we have just the show for you.
You, Me, and Squee is a new podcast where we explore the challenges of being new parents and everything we learn along the way. We'll talk about our experiences, different parenting philosophies and trends, giving our own perspectives, and talking about what worked for us and what didn't.
Let's face it, a lot has changed since our parents and grandparents were raising kids. So we're all kind of figuring out this new frontier for ourselves, and it can feel pretty lonely. So come join us for the journey where sometimes we'll laugh, sometimes we'll cry, but we'll always be real with you.
You, Me, and Squee. It beats listening to your childless aunt give her 2 cents.
Or any of your aunts, really.
And we're back. Those were, as Garth would say, those were some bones, weren't they?
They were. I scraped some head cheese off of that skull, and let me tell you, we are making sandwiches.
Okay, so before we move on, another inspiration for Washington Irving. There was a real dude named Ichabod Crane.
Really?
Yes, and he was actually a colonel in like the Navy during the War of 1812. So after the time when Sleepy Hollow would have been. So when he says in his story that like, oh no, the real Ichabod Crane later became a colonel and like a politician. He was like trying to throw the trail onto this other guy who was real, who he knew.
I was gonna say, is this someone he actually knew, or did he just like know of? And
No,
he
he knew him.
Threw this guy's life into turmoil.
He knew him, and also if you go to the cemetery in Tarrytown, there is a grave for a Christina Van Tassel.
Yeah, wow.
So
okay.
he saw these names on headstones, like the names that he throws into Sleepy Hollow were real people from the area, giving it a layer of authenticity. That could,
Very cool. I like that.
Yeah. But other things about this archetype of a headless horse person. I said that it seems to be tied to a lot of stories about war. So I mentioned that Aaron Burr said he saw it. Another dude said he saw in a different battle. It's cannons blowing people's heads off in these battles.
If you're in battles with a lot of cannon fire, you're going to see somebody lose their head.
Right?
It's just going to happen.
Then there's a whole bunch of these stories that come again during the Civil War. People talking about seeing Civil War, specifically like people on horseback getting their heads blown off, and they keep riding because it's like the body doesn't know it's dead yet.
Yeah.
It became such a thing that in 1870, the Lancet, which is the British medical journal, it has a whole article about this question of, if you cut somebody's head off fast enough, could they keep riding a horse? And
and please tell me there were tests and experiments.
Well, there was this idea at the time that if somebody died suddenly enough, that their body would basically instantly freeze up. And you'd hear people say I saw a guy who got shot and he just stood up. He never fell. He just locked up and stood there, usually in battle. This actually might be a real thing. So we know about rigor mortis. Rigor mortis is, that the body will stiffen up starts about 4 hours after death. And then about 8 hours later, it will start to loosen up again. And this is just it's because of the way that certain chemicals are processed in the cells of your muscle tissue. They're not producing the oxygen anymore, and so they don't relax, they tense up, and then over time that starts to kind of slowly fade. Well, the idea is that if somebody dies suddenly enough, that blood flow from the heart stops quick enough, that process is instantaneous.
Okay.
And
all right.
And they said that this has been seen in a few cases, but it has to be a particularly sudden and violent death, where basically the body is hit so hard that everything just seizes up.
And
so
losing a head might do that.
Yeah. And so these people very well probably did see headless horsemen on battlefields, especially once cannons started getting fired.
Well, and at a minimum, if you're riding a horse and you're in a battle and this horse is terrified and it's running and a cannon takes your head off, momentum alone is going to carry you for at least some period of time. Not an hour, not a day, but enough of a period of time that enough people would have seen somebody upright without a head on a horse.
And that's the thing. You'd think people are oh, well, why wouldn't the cannon just knock them off the horse? I don't think you understand how fast, the velocity that cannonballs travel at, and just the Newtonian physics of it. No, it is so dense and it is so much more mass than a human head traveling at such a speed that it the head ceases to exist and the ball carries on, but the body keeps moving the other way. It's fascinating.
Yeah, because that's the thing. It's not exactly as though the cannonball is going to be. There's not enough friction for it to drag the body backwards. It hits that head. The head is no longer, and so it doesn't apply any backwards forces onto the shoulder and neck.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, somebody who's getting their head shot off by a cannon, it's like, the Titan sub implosion levels of how quick you're dead. Your head just is gone.
Yeah.
Anyway, now moving to the archetype. So people were seeing this, but the archetype of a headless rider on horseback, way, way older than that, before cannons. This might be, I think this idea of a rider without a head on horseback is so incredibly old and widespread that it probably started shortly after the domestication of horses. So, we're talking the earliest evidence we have where we can say people were riding horses or using them for chariots is around 2000 BCE. So, about 4,000 years ago. People start riding horses. And what are they using them for? Well, there's this misconception. You watch a movie, say, let's say set later than that, like in the Middle Ages. And like people are riding horses, right? Or even in Westerns, everybody's riding horses. Not everybody could afford a horse. A horse is a very expensive item to have.
Yeah.
The further back you go, the more, I mean, even now they're pricey. I mean, somebody who used to have horses, let me tell you, the cost of maintaining such a large animal, healthy and happy, is insane. It's a rich person's thing.
That's the thing. It's not just the cost of the horse itself, which isn't cheap. It's then the maintenance, the upkeep that's gonna get you.
And so they were a status symbol at a certain point, where only nobility, or people who were high enough up could have a horse. But another place where you would find them though is in warfare. That's where we start to see this like connection of horses and warriors, people fighting without a head. The idea of the head being a source of power, or of particular magical importance and significance, extremely old as well, predates we have evidence that predates writing of heads being venerated on their own, separate from the body. You can go to say Çatalhöyük in Turkey, which is one of the earliest human large-scale settlements. Like, agriculture didn't even exist yet, and yet there's like a couple thousand people living in basically a giant apartment building. And you can find that they are burying human skulls like under what would be their bed in their houses. So the question is, like, are these ancestors they're venerating? We don't know. Going even further back than that, just a little bit further back, there's Göbekli Tepe, also in Turkey, which this is like, we're getting to the point where like the Ice Age is just over and things are starting to kind of warm up. People aren't even living in cities yet. There's no agriculture, and yet they're building these massive stones, these stacked stones in a structure, and they are carving images of animals and also human heads.
Yeah.
So this idea of the head that's a human thing, because it's also one of the things that you can look at and identify that's a human. There's other things that have a vaguely man-like shape, and those are monsters.
Right.
Apes, for example. But like, you see the human face and it's undeniable. Like, okay, it's a human. There's Roman writings talking about the ancient Celts being headhunters and collecting heads, and they would ride with the heads tied to their saddles. So they would collect heads because they believed that the head was where the soul resided, and by taking someone's head, you were like stealing their soul and possessing it, and that gives you power. And so what better way
that's fairly reasonable to think that that's where the soul lives. I mean, if you were back then, you don't have a lot of science, and you go chopping off parts of people to see which part seems to deanimate them.
Yeah.
Right? The one that's going to do it the fastest is the head. It's the natural conclusion
it's the head and the heart. Those are the two important ones. Your brain and the heart. Yep. But think about it. You have like riders on horseback riding into battle with human heads tied to their saddles. Over time, that story is going to get repeated and told, where it's like, well, there was heads, but they were on the saddle, and there's no head on the thing. Or if you want to make it seem more supernatural, what is the quickest way you can denote that somebody is dead and is somehow now from beyond, is that you remove the head, because there's no way they could be alive, like you just said.
Right.
And so if you want to give your supernatural being or your story this element where like there's no way you could deny that thing is dead, remove the head. And that goes to the prank of Brom Bones, is that,
right.
Ichabod doesn't question that it's the Headless Horseman, because there's nothing else that could have no head and ride. Surely it's not a guy with a fake pair of shoulders,
No, of course not.
Also in the story of
jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah, in the story of Sleepy Hollow as well, we see that fact that horses are a luxury item. He makes a point of saying that Brom has his own horse named Daredevil, a black stallion, that is because he's the rich boy in town. It's like, the quarterback of the football team at the high school having a Ferrari or a Jag or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Ichabod, the poor outsider, not of that class, has to borrow a worn down, out to pasture horse.
One-eyed horse.
Yeah, right. And so again, there's that archetype in that thing that at one time was common sense to people. Like, people reading this at the time it came out, like, they got the metaphors, because it was more, that was the world you lived in.
Which was the style at the time.
Where else was I going with this? Basically, yeah. So that's the problem, though, is when I have too much time to research, I don't know how to rein it in
Yeah.
like the horse, and there we go.
Oh,
There we go. That's the transition.
Yes, transition.
Beer time? Let's talk some beer.
Let's talk beer. Yeah. Okay. And welcome to Beer Corner. And Beer Corner. Blue, 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 blue. Beer Corner. Welcome to Beer Corner. Yeah.
Garth isn't here today. This is what we got.
That's right. That's right. Sorry, I'm store brand Garth.
Kroger brand.
That's it. Kroger brand Garth. Okay, so beer, for those of you who don't know, is generally speaking an alcoholic beverage that is made from grain. And we've got a lot of different styles of beer, but there's some similarities between many of the styles. Generally speaking, your beer is going to come carbonated. It is going to have an alcohol level of anywhere from 2 to 3%, all the way up to 13, 14, or some crazy beers we've had that are over 20%, if you can believe it.
When does it become booze?
Yeah. So it's there's a classification called barley wine, which is a fairly wide range, and generally, unless you're distilling it, it's gonna stay as a wine or a high wine or different things like that.
So distillation is the key between
that's what gets it into the liquor category.
Got it.
And I can tell you quite honestly, I have no idea how these guys are getting beers up above 20% range. That's just, it's crazy to me.
They're enriching it somehow.
Son of a bitch. They're putting something in that, because you can't just make beer like that.
What do you mean? Like they're enriching it? Are they enriching it?
You cannot.
They're enriching the beer, Charlie.
Enriching the beer.
There you go. That's what's going on here. Yeah. So one of the, if you look at any of the depictions of beer in popular media, or anybody who's drank a beer, you understand that there's the concept of the head of the beer, which is a foamy top that you get in the glass when you pour a beer. Now, the head has a number of characteristics, and there are a lot of different views on head and what its purpose is, and whether you should have it and how much, etc. Generally speaking, the head results from the CO2 coming out of suspension in the liquid and reacting with proteins in the beer to form these bubbles that then persist and stay at the top of the beer. There's different. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, so is that why, sometimes if I am not I gotta say for the record, I am not a beer drinker. I'm not even an alcohol drinker. And so beer really is like this foreign territory to me, except for the week after my 21st birthday, where I got a keg of Coors Light for a party that no one came to. And I really needed that deposit back a week later. So there was a week where I just became an alcoholic. I'd get home from work and I would have an empty gallon milk jug that was cleaned out, and I would fill it from the keg, and they're like, okay, well, I'm drinking my gallon of beer tonight, I guess.
Yikes. A gallon of Coors Light is not good for you. Anyone listening at home, don't drink a gallon of Coors Light.
Oddly enough, around the time my hair started to fall out, it migrated elsewhere. I don't know if that was the beer's fault. But I noticed that I do know that people, when there's the stereotype of the keg that has been either shaken or pumped wrong or too much, and then you have way too much foam. That's because it's been agitated enough that the CO2 is escaping at a higher level? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, and that is something that can happen, and it happens depending on how you pour your beer also, and how you hold the glass, and various things can contribute to more or less of the head. But that's exactly it. It is oftentimes the rate that the CO2 is coming out of the liquid. It also has to do with the protein content of the style of beer that you have. Another aspect for those who are more into beers, some beers are tapped with nitrogen instead of with CO2, and that can change the quantity and quality of the head, the size of the bubbles.
They're starting to do that with soda. You can buy. I saw it in the store. It was like a $8 can of Pepsi because it's nitro. I'm like, yeah, fuck yourself, Pepsi Cola.
Yeah, don't buy that. That sounds
And this
awful.
is from somebody who, I don't drink beer, but one thing I really enjoy is I do consider myself a connoisseur of a good cola. I really like the flavor characteristics of like a good artisanal cola. I am not going to pay $8 for a Pepsi with nitrous.
I will tell you this. What you should do is find somebody who is making artisanal craft colas and see if they are doing a nitro tap on it. Because if they are, it will add a milky, creamy quality to it. And you may very well enjoy that. And there are some folks who are making some artisanal craft colas, tapping them themselves. But don't buy the one from Pepsi. That is that's just theft. That's highway robbery. Yeah. And speaking of having the the nitro tap versus the CO2, Guinness is one that is very commonly known that has in their cans they invented the widget. Yeah, exactly, which allows for that beautiful nitro pour out of a can. But there are a lot of bars and tap rooms which will have separate taps that are hooked up to the nitrogen so that they can do a nitro tap on different beers, and you get that smaller, much smaller bubble that creates a creamier instead of a coarse head like you will with CO2.
Wait, so is Guinness nitro?
Guinness has, yes, exactly. Guinness is nitro in the container.
And so the widget's point is to agitate it to make those bubbles happen.
The widget's point is to ensure that you get exactly that proper creamy pour like you would if you had it on an actual nitro
I always thought the widget was just there to make it fucking really hard to recycle those goddamn cans.
Yes. Yeah, it was to get people to lose their fingers ripping the cans open to figure out what was rattling around inside of there.
You go to the recycling center with a bag full of Guinness cans and they're like, fuck you, like half that's plastic weight. We can't take that.
It's true. 100% true. Guinness is terrible for the planet. Remember that. And so that's something that can give you different qualities of the head, right? As I said, the smaller bubbles gives you the creamier consistency. The larger bubbles will give you a little bit of a coarser consistency that will fluff a little bit more. Now, with different beer styles, you may want more or less head. Traditionally, having anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of head on your pour was seen as the standard. That's what you were going for. In the United States, we have definitely moved away from that, especially with our pale ales, our IPAs, and things like that, where when we want a pint of beer, right, we don't want 14 ounces of beer and the rest of it filled up with some foam. We're paying a lot of money for this beer, and we want it to the rim, no foam.
Like a bag of chips that's all air.
That's exactly it. I'm not paying for the air. I'm paying for the chips. And so the style of pouring from the tap with the glass tilted so that you get less agitation as the beer carefully slides down the side of the glass versus going straight down and agitating at the bottom, that's going to greatly reduce the amount of head that you get at the end. And so there's a style of a slower pour with the glass tilted, tipping it back up to vertical at the end. One of the consequences of that with your headless beer is that because you have less of the CO2 agitating out and creating that head, more of the CO2 remains in the beer. And two things can happen. One, you're going to burp a lot more because the CO2 is going to come out.
Yeah.
It's just going to come out in your digestive system. But the other factor is that the CO2 dissolved in the beer is going to create carbonic acid, which does lower the pH and gives you a little bit of that acid bite to it. And so a lot of brewers, when they're developing their pale ales, their IPAs, or other styles that Americans are going to pour without head, they are planning that into the flavor profile.
Okay.
And so if you do pour it differently with more agitation to get more of the head, you're also going to end up with a sweeter experience from the beer as more of the carbonic acid is released.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're saying IPAs are kind of the style that people would want to go with less head for. That's just kind of the preference here in America.
Yeah, if you go to a lot of European countries, especially Czech style, and we're seeing a lot more of these on social media, and we actually have a lot of breweries. I won't say a lot. There are more breweries popping up that are just doing Czech styles here in the United States as well, as people get a little bit burned out on IPAs and double IPAs being the the main part of the lineup. There are these other breweries that are specializing, and throughout Europe, these are common.
One thing I do know about beer is that Budweiser was actually a Czech-style beer. Everybody thinks it's the
Czech-style lager.
Yeah, everybody thinks because the name Budweiser sounds German that it's a German beer. But it's actually a Czech style, and I think they just picked a name from Germany, and because it's an American beer, and so I think that's what it was. It's like there was a Czech style beer by a Czech immigrant, and then they're like, well, people expect beer to be German, so we're just gonna pick a name from like a German map, and I think that's what it is, because the ER at the end in German denotes that it is like from a place, so it is Budweiser. It's like beer in the style of Budweiser, so it'd be Budweiser. And I think that's what it is, but yeah, it's actually Czech, and I don't know why I know that. I don't drink beer.
Yeah. Cody knows at least one thing about everything.
Well, I used to go to bar trivia every week for 3 straight years, so I absorbed some stuff, just not alcohol.
It's because you just loved the nachos that much.
Oh, yeah. You know how good it feels to fucking just break somebody else's hopes and dreams on trivia night? Oh, God. People hated our team. That's actually how that's how Garth and I started hanging out.
You are a sick man, Cody Franks. No.
Hey, some people went to the bar to get drunk. I went to, get my rocks off, destroying people in trivia.
Mentally dominate those around you. Yeah.
That's why I do the podcast.
But yeah, so Czech styles and several other styles, they actually there are different types of pours that you can choose depending on what you're looking for, with some that have a 1-inch head that is there, some that they have the head that is coming up and out of the glass, so it looks like one of those old school soft serve swirly cones at the top.
Yeah.
They have some that are like a 50-50, where half the glass is going to be foam and the other half will be beer, and some that are called a milker, where almost the entire glass is foam with the tiniest little bit of beer at the bottom. And there are a lot of people who prefer that, and they think, hey, this is the way. Those people are wrong, and if you meet one of them, don't talk to them. They're terrible people. But
I think I get why, though. I know that there was like a culinary movement for a while about foaming things, because it engages more of the olfactory senses to have those, because smell and taste are linked together. And there was this idea about the foam giving you more of the flavor essence. So those are people who are drinking for the flavor, which is something that as a non-beer drinker, I refuse to believe that that's real. You mean you want to drink this? What?
That is something you absolutely get, because the head does trap all of those volatile aromas that would otherwise be evaporating off. And so when you have that 1/2-inch to 3/4-inch foam there, when you take a sip, you will get more of the aroma character because it's been trapped there, as well as if you have a larger head, when you get that in your mouth, the bubbles are popping.
Yeah, you're smelling that aroma. Yeah,
exactly.
And that's why you probably want more, is so that every sip you take is consistently that experience.
Absolutely,
that makes sense.
And so there should be a balance. I definitely, look, I want every drop of the beer I paid for as much as the next person, but there does need to be that balance of, you get that 1/2-inch to 3/4-inch head at the top. It serves its purpose. Depending on the beer style, it provides a creamy quality and element to it. It dislodges a little bit of the CO2, so you get a little bit less bloating. But at the end of the day, you are getting the beer, and you are getting it with the flavor profile that the brewer intended.
All right.
Yeah.
I think I understand it now. I'm never going to really experience it. Although I guess, some colas are kind of like that. There's some ones that you said they're a little bit more, they kind of have a head on that,
Yeah, and especially if you're going with something like a root beer or something like that, that is something that you would potentially have. The head might be more desirable on something like that.
There used to be a brand that was their whole thing, wasn't it? Like a creamy root
Mug.
beer? Mug? Was it Mug? Yeah.
Mug root beer. They definitely was in all of their iconography, if you will.
Yeah. If you had to design a beer that is not an IPA, let's just say that, throw those out, but one that is, and based off the name of naming it the Headless Horseman, what kind of beer would that be?
Well, so generally my mind, when I think about the Headless Horseman, because it is a little bit spooky, there's a jack-o'-lantern involved, I start thinking of Halloween. And around Halloween is when I really want to start getting into porters. But The problem with that is, porters and stouts. The problem with that is if you have the name Headless Horseman, you think you're going to want a beer that doesn't have a head on it.
Yeah.
Whereas with a porter and a stout, you're going to want that creamy head on there. So I would say
creamy head.
Hey, phrasing.
What you want a little, you want to get a little bit of that creamy head. You know what I'm talking about. I would say that what I would want to do in that case is potentially a black lager.
Uh-huh.
And so that is going to be a lager style beer that is done with a heavily roasted malt that gives it that really dark black characteristic. And so you'll be getting some of those similar flavors. You'll be getting that similar color as the type of beer that I would be wanting as we get into fall and like that. But it would be a beer that is also perfectly crisp and nice without a heavy head pour on it. And so I think that would do well as the Headless Horseman.
Very nice. Also, the black color, the Headless Horseman is wearing black.
Yep, and Brom Bones as the Black Stallion.
Could there be a Dutch style lager that is dark like that? Because you got to get that. They're all Dutch. Oh no, wait, he was German though. Never mind. He was a Hessian.
Well, the Hessian was the Headless Horseman.
Yeah.
So yeah,
so be a German.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
There you go. And then if you want the tie-in to Anheuser-Busch, and they have the draft horses.
Oh yeah.
They do, and so you could get a tie-in there with the lager.
You could do the label is Headless Horseman, but he's riding a black draft horse.
Yeah.
I think you know what. Make it so. I think we need to start our line of like least haunted and Hoppy Trails exclusive beers.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't drink
100%.
Them,
we'll get Garth on the artwork there, right?
Yeah, if he gets back from finding that sloth.
Garth has a very successful career of creating imagery of people's dead pets, and so I think he could do a headless horse for us. That would be no problem. No problem.
He's like, no, I need to see the face. That's where all the character of it could be any horse. It couldn't be your horse. That's anyone's horse.
Yeah, well, we know the head is the source of the spirit and the soul. We just went over this, so if Garth was listening, he would know.
A few things I'm sure if I don't quickly shout them out, people might say like, "Hey, what about this?" And again, I did so much research that there's things that I'm now remembering. Like, oh yeah, this could be like 4 hours just talking about like this idea of cephalophores. They are saints who are depicted as carrying their own head.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a whole like history of saints getting decapitated and then being alive and walking away with their head. But I think I'm gonna have to do a whole episode about cephalophores at some point, because that's there's a lot of meat on those decapitated heads. But yeah, that's usually I have some way to bring everything back together. I got nothing. Other than that we need to make this Headless Horseman dark lager, and I will watch other people drink it and enjoy it vicariously through them. In the case of me and Allison, she is my DD, and that is designated drinker. I drive, she drinks, and it works out wonderfly for us.
Yes, you gotta have a partnership, right? I like to dance. She likes to watch me dance. That's
on the note. Tying it dancing together to drinking. I realized at a certain point that I don't dance, like in social situations, like weddings and stuff. I don't dance, and I realized the problem is I would need to be drunk to dance, and I don't drink. Therefore, yeah. Anyway.
Common problem of teetotalers everywhere.
Well, I mean, we find other ways to get by. All right, speaking of getting by, you know what helps us get by at the Least Haunted Podcast? Our Monster Squadron producers.
Yeah.
And you're one of them. Actually, you're alphabetically, you're the first one.
Alphabetically, I'm the first one. It's true.
Until somebody comes to, Aaron Aronson comes along and kicks you off. No, wait, it has to be before L.
Aaron Abelson.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
I took care of that Abelson years ago, so I'm not worried about that.
All right. And he's a lawyer. He knows how to get away with it. So patron producers, Travis Alexander, the Barbarian, Rachel Krieger, Tom Dahl, Justin Duckham, Kelly Flynn, Gunnar Franks, Carla Harrington, Havelock, Christina Hurley, New Jared, Ken with 2 N's, Brian Lamb, TJ Levenhagen, Jordan Ramey, a different one but the same one, Blue Roan, Seti Fan, and Tatum. And yeah, so thanks guys. Those are all of our patron producers. If you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/leasthaunted. And you can also join us on our Discord. It's becoming a real popping place. And also on the Blue Sky, leasthaunted.bluesky.social. We're on there.
Yeah, and let me say, if you're not a patron, definitely get in and become a patron. There's a lot of fun stuff that goes into it. One of the things is you will get your own song that Garth will write you into, which is amazing. And there is on the Discord doing the hangouts and things like that. They are a lot of fun. It really is a blast. I recommend it. If you're not a patron, become a patron. Do it. You'll be glad you did.
Yeah, our next hangout, Monster Squadron hangout, is tomorrow, Saturday at 8:00 Pacific time. But Travis, why don't you shout out your socials and how people can support you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Hoppy Trails podcast, I'm co-host with Nick, as we discussed earlier. Great show where we talk about beer and food and life and enjoyment of life and everything like that. And you can check us out at Hoppy Trails Pod on Instagram, on YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And then we also have the You, Me, and Squee podcast, which is a great show that I do with my wife, Stephanie. And we basically are going through our parenting journey, learning together, and not just learning about parenting and how that works, but also exploring ourselves, how we got to where we are and where we want to be. And so it's a little bit of a different style, but it's a lot of fun, and we love doing it. So that's YMS Pod on Instagram, no YouTube, but you can also check us out for the podcast on any of your podcast players.
Sweet. Should we mention Sequoidea, or should we just wrap it up?
That we absolutely should. Sequoidea Productions LLC is where it's where we come together. We bring a lot of our artistic, not just talents, but our desires, our need to create, and we bring them together. There's a lot of great shows that we all work together on, and to check us out. If you're interested in starting a show, you don't know where to begin, reach out to us. That's one of the things we do.
Yeah. We are as Michael Swaim just accused me recently of doing, teaching everybody to do what we do, thus undercutting our own market.
Yeah.
But hey, we'll ride that pony for a while until it loses its head.
That's it. It's, the business model is you give a man a fish and he eats for a day. You teach a man to fish and you've lost your whole customer base, right?
Yes. So but that's a good problem to have,
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Okay, well, shout out to everybody. Like I said, Patreon, Discord, already did that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So until, well, I don't know what I know what next time's going to be. Actually, I'm gonna tease it, let everybody know.
A little French tickler.
Yeah. So next time, I actually am going to be reuniting with my brother Gunnar, who joined us in episode 3, Spooky House, which was actually the second episode ever recorded. He's going to come back in, and we are going to talk about lighthouses. Because he has a strange obsession that he will try to deny about lighthouses, and so we're going to delve into that. Try to shine a light through the fog.
Yes. Yeah. Well done.
So that'll be next time. And until then, though, as always, the only thing that's haunted
is you.
The truth is only funny if the whole world is laughing at you.
Say goodbye.
The heads are gone?
Taken by the Headless Horseman. Taken back to hell.
The Least Haunted podcast is recorded before a dead studio audience and is a presentation of Sequoidea Productions, LLC.